Hey everyone, welcome back. Thanks for tuning in again. Tonight, we're jumping into some unsettling, true horror stories that'll make you think twice about everyday encounters. So get comfortable, or maybe not too comfortable, and let's get started.
It all started when I moved in with Claire, a friend of a friend. I was in need of a place fast, and she seemed normal enough. At first, everything was great. We had movie nights, shared groceries, and laughed over stupid memes. But little things started happening. Things that didn't feel right. The first red flag? My stuff. I started noticing that things in my room were off. My clothes, books, even my laptop weren't where I'd left them. At first, I brushed it off, thinking I was just tired or forgetful. But then one afternoon, I came home early from work, and there she was. Claire sitting on my bed, scrolling through my phone. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded, my heart racing. She looked up at me like it was no big deal. "Oh, I needed to check something, and you were in the shower." I was too stunned to say anything at first. I couldn't believe the nerve. But she acted like it was no big deal, and somehow I let it slide. That was a mistake, a big one. Over the next few weeks, things got worse. Claire became obsessed with knowing where I was going, who I was talking to, and what I was doing every minute of the day. She'd follow me around the apartment, acting like we were best friends, but something felt off. It wasn't just her over-the-top friendliness. It was the way she twisted things, making me feel guilty for the smallest things. She made me feel like I was the one overreacting when I confronted her. Then, she started using personal things against me. I don't know how she did it, but Claire somehow got into my phone and read my private texts. It started small. She'd drop random comments about things I hadn't told her, but I didn't think much of it at first. I thought it was coincidence until it escalated. One night, my boyfriend Mark came over for dinner. We were having a good time, just talking and laughing, when Claire dropped this bomb. "So, Katie, when are you going to tell him about your little secret?" My heart sank. "What are you talking about?" I asked, already feeling the panic rise in my chest. Claire just smiled, her eyes locked on mine. "Oh, you know, the messages you've been sending to your ex." I felt like I was going to be sick. There was no way she could have known about the brief, harmless conversation I'd had with an old boyfriend. But there she was, airing my private business in front of Mark. The look on his face told me everything. I needed to know it was over before I even had a chance to explain. Claire excused herself after that, leaving me to deal with the fallout she'd created. That night, I locked my door. I didn't trust her, and I didn't know what else she'd been snooping through. But even that didn't stop her. One night, I woke up to a strange feeling. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and there, at the foot of my bed, was Claire. She was just standing there, staring at me. My blood ran cold. "Claire, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She smiled, and I swear it wasn't the kind of smile a friend gives. It was off. "Just making sure you're okay," she said, her voice soft and eerie. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, I packed a bag, left the apartment, and didn't go back. I crashed on a friend's couch while I found a new place. Claire tried to keep in contact, sending texts and showing up at my work unannounced, but I didn't engage. I blocked her number, her social media, everything. Even now, years later, I get chills when I think about Claire. How normal she seemed at first, how quickly things got twisted. It's terrifying to realize that sometimes the worst monsters are the people who pretend to be your friends. I met Emily at work. We hit it off right away, bonding over our shared love for travel and true crime podcasts. She was funny, outgoing, and always up for an adventure. At first, I felt lucky to have found such a close friend so quickly. But things started changing. Small things at first until they weren't small anymore. The first sign something was off was when Emily began showing up everywhere. And I mean everywhere. At first, it seemed like coincidence. She'd run into me at the coffee shop, or show up at the gym when I was there. But soon she was at places I hadn't mentioned, like a family restaurant where I'd been having dinner with my sister, or a friend's birthday party that I didn't invite her to. It was as if she had a sixth sense for where I'd be. "Wow, this is so random," Emily would say, smiling like it was all a happy accident. But my gut told me otherwise. One night, things escalated. I was on a date with a guy I'd just started seeing, Matt. We went to a new bar in town, one I hadn't even told anyone about yet. About halfway through our drinks, guess who walked through the door? Emily. I felt the blood drain from my face. She walked straight over to our table, all smiles and acting surprised. "Oh my God, you're here too. What are the chances?" My date looked confused. I was mortified. Emily sat down with us, uninvited, and made herself comfortable, completely ignoring the fact that this was a date. She kept interrupting our conversation, talking about inside jokes and stories from work. By the end of the night, Matt was so uncomfortable he left early, and I was left sitting there furious. The next day I confronted her about it. "Emily, you can't just show up like that. You completely ruined my night." Her expression darkened. "Ruined? I thought I was helping. I mean, Matt wasn't even your type, right? I was trying to make things less awkward for you." I didn't know how to respond. She genuinely believed she'd done me a favor. Things got worse after that. Emily started texting me constantly, checking in on where I was, what I was doing, and who I was with. If I didn't respond immediately, she'd blow up my phone with questions like, "Are you mad at me?" or "Did I do something wrong?" It was exhausting. I began to feel like I had to justify every moment I wasn't spending with her. One weekend, I decided to take a break. I planned a solo trip to a cabin in the mountains. No friends, no work, just peace and quiet. I didn't tell anyone where I was going except for my mom. I needed space. I was there for maybe a day when I heard a knock on the cabin door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I figured it was someone from the rental office. But when I opened the door, my stomach dropped. It was Emily. She stood there with a big grin and a bag of groceries. "Surprise! I thought you might need some company up here." I couldn't believe it. "How did you even know I was here?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Oh, I ran into your mom at the store. She mentioned you were heading up this way, so I thought I'd come surprise you. I brought snacks." She pushed past me and set the bag on the counter, acting like nothing was wrong. I was frozen in place. I wanted to scream, to tell her to leave, but I couldn't find the words. The rest of that night, Emily acted like everything was fine, while I felt like I was losing my mind. Every time I tried to ask her why she was there, she'd brush it off with a laugh, saying how happy she was to spend time with me. I barely slept that night, terrified of how far she'd gone to insert herself into my life. The next morning, I packed up and left the cabin early. I didn't say goodbye to Emily, I just left. I blocked her number, her social media, everything. When I got home, I found dozens of missed calls and messages from her, asking why I'd left, begging me to talk to her. I ignored them all. It took months before I felt safe again, and even now, I check over my shoulder every time I'm out. Because sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones we should fear the most. I've always loved vintage shopping. That's how I met Hannah. We'd both reached for the same antique mirror at a flea market, laughing over the coincidence. We hit it off instantly. She was charming, knew everything about antiques, and had this magnetic personality that made it hard not to like her. We exchanged numbers, and within days, she became my go-to vintage shopping buddy. At first, everything was fine, fun even. We'd go to estate sales and thrift shops, bonding over our mutual love for strange old things. But the more time I spent with her, the more strange things started happening around me. It started small, feeling watched in my own apartment, shadows shifting in the corners of my vision. I figured I was just paranoid. Maybe all the creepy old things I was bringing into my home were getting into my head. Then one night, things took a turn for the worse. Hannah had come over to help me decorate my apartment with some of our new finds, including the mirror we had both wanted. It was a large, ornate piece with a tarnished silver frame, the kind of mirror that looked like it had seen too much over the years. I hung it in my bedroom, despite the odd feeling it gave me. That night, after Hannah left, I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when I heard a faint sound, like a whisper. I sat up, heart pounding, and looked around the room. Nothing. Just the dim glow of my bedside lamp. But when I glanced at the mirror, my blood turned to ice. There, reflected in the glass, was a figure standing in the corner of my room. A woman, her face pale, her eyes hollow. I spun around, but no one was there. I stared back at the mirror, my breath catching in my throat. The woman was still there, watching me. I scrambled out of bed, grabbing my phone to call Hannah. She answered on the first ring, her voice calm. Too calm. "I see you met her," she said before I could speak. "What? Who are you talking about?" "The woman in the mirror," Hannah replied, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "She's been with me for years. Follows me, actually. But don't worry, she's mostly harmless." I was shaking now, my back pressed against the far wall as far from the mirror as I could get. "Mostly harmless? What the hell is going on, Hannah?" She sighed on the other end of the line. "I thought it would be better if she stayed with you for a while. You've got all that new space, and well, I need a break." I didn't know whether to scream or hang up. "What are you talking about? Take her back." "You can't just pass her back," she said, her voice eerily casual. "The mirror has to stay. Don't worry, though. She only gets upset when you ignore her." The line went dead. I was frozen in place, staring at the mirror. The figure hadn't moved, but her eyes followed me. My pulse raced as I felt a chill crawl down my spine. My mind raced. Was this some kind of joke? Was Hannah trying to scare me? But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was something much darker. I grabbed a blanket and covered the mirror, throwing it over the top so I didn't have to see whatever was lurking in that glass. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel the woman's gaze, like she was just on the other side of the blanket, waiting. The next morning I called Hannah again. She didn't pick up. I texted her, but she never responded. It was like she had vanished. I even drove to her apartment, but no one answered the door. It was as if she had disappeared completely, leaving me with the cursed mirror and the woman inside it. I tried to get rid of it, of course. I took it down, shoved it into my closet. But no matter what I did, I could hear the faint whispers at night. And sometimes, when I walked by, I'd catch a glimpse of her in the reflection, just standing there, watching. I don't know what Hannah's deal was, or why she left the mirror with me, but now I'm stuck with it. And every night, when I go to bed, I can feel her there, waiting. It all started when I needed a new roommate. Living in the city was expensive, and when Kara responded to my ad, she seemed perfect, friendly, responsible, with a steady job. She moved in quickly, and for the first month, everything was great. We got along well, shared meals, and even had a few movie nights. But after a while, I began to notice some strange things. It started small. I'd come home from work and find things slightly out of place in my room, even though I always kept it locked. A book would be moved, my clothes folded differently, or the drawer where I kept my personal things would be slightly ajar. I asked Kara about it, but she laughed it off, saying I was probably just imagining it. I wanted to believe her, but something didn't feel right. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of footsteps outside my door. At first, I thought maybe Kara was getting a late-night snack, but the footsteps stopped right outside my room. I lay there, heart pounding, listening. Then I heard the faint click of the door handle. Someone was trying to open it. I jumped out of bed, yanking the door open, only to find Kara standing there. She had a blank expression, her hand still on the doorknob. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice shaky. She blinked, her face suddenly lighting up in a grin. "Oh, I thought I heard something in your room. I was just checking to make sure you were okay." It was such an odd excuse, and the way she said it made my skin crawl. I locked my door after that, but the next morning, I found it unlocked again. I knew for a fact I had locked it, but somehow, Kara was still getting in. Over the next few weeks, her behavior grew more erratic. She became overly interested in my schedule, always asking where I was going, when I'd be home, and who I was with. She would show up unannounced when I was out with friends, claiming she just happened to be in the area. It started to feel like she was tracking my every move. One day, I came home early from work, and that's when I saw it. I walked into my room to find Kara sitting on my bed, scrolling through my phone. She had no idea I was there at first, so I just stood frozen in the doorway watching her. My phone was locked, but she somehow had access to it, going through my texts, my photos, everything. "Kara, what the hell are you doing?" I said, my voice shaking with anger and fear. She didn't even flinch. She just turned and smiled at me, like nothing was wrong. "I was just making sure you didn't have any secrets," she said, her tone casual. "You can never be too careful, right?" That was the last straw. I told her to leave my room, that she had crossed the line, but she just stood there staring at me with that same eerie smile. "Why are you upset? I'm just trying to look out for you," she said, as if her actions were perfectly normal. I decided that night I had to move out, but before I could, things took a darker turn. One night, I came home from dinner with a friend to find my room completely ransacked. My clothes were thrown everywhere, drawers pulled out, and personal items scattered all over the floor. In the middle of the chaos was Kara, holding one of my journals, reading it like it was a novel. I lost it. "What the hell are you doing?" Kara looked up at me, completely unfazed. "I just wanted to know more about you. Why are you so mad? Don't you trust me?" I grabbed my journal out of her hands and told her I was moving out, that I couldn't live with her anymore. But instead of apologizing, she looked hurt. Genuinely hurt. "I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "We're supposed to be best friends." That night, I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend. I planned to come back the next day to get the rest of my things, but when I returned, Kara was waiting for me. She was standing in the living room, holding a kitchen knife, her eyes cold and distant. "You're not leaving me," she said quietly, the knife glinting in the dim light. My heart pounded in my chest. "Kara, put the knife down," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She took a step toward me. "You don't get it, do you? I did all this for you. I've been taking care of you, watching out for you. Why can't you see that?" I backed up slowly, my hands shaking as I reached for my phone to call the police. "Kara, this isn't normal. You need help." Her eyes filled with tears, but her grip on the knife tightened. "I'm the only one who cares about you. You'll see that eventually." I managed to slip out the door and called the police. When they arrived, Kara was still standing in the living room, knife in hand, sobbing uncontrollably. She was taken into custody, but the fear of what could have happened still haunts me. It wasn't until after she was gone that I realized how far her obsession had gone. I found hidden cameras in my room, disguised among my belongings. She had been watching me for months, monitoring me, all under the guise of being my friend. Even now, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I can hear her footsteps outside my door. One night, I came home from dinner with a friend to find my room completely ransacked. My clothes were thrown everywhere, drawers pulled out, and personal items scattered all over the floor. In the middle of the chaos was Kara, holding one of my journals, reading it like it was a novel. I lost it. "What the hell are you doing?" Kara looked up at me, completely unfazed. "I just wanted to know more about you. Why are you so mad? Don't you trust me?" I grabbed my journal out of her hands and told her I was moving out, that I couldn't live with her anymore. But instead of apologizing, she looked hurt. Genuinely hurt. "I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "We're supposed to be best friends." That night, I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend. I planned to come back the next day to get the rest of my things, but when I returned, Kara was waiting for me. She was standing in the living room, holding a kitchen knife, her eyes cold and distant. "You're not leaving me," she said quietly, the knife glinting in the dim light. My heart pounded in my chest. "Kara, put the knife down," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She took a step toward me. "You don't get it, do you? I did all this for you. I've been taking care of you, watching out for you. Why can't you see that?" I backed up slowly, my hands shaking as I reached for my phone to call the police. "Kara, this isn't normal. You need help." Her eyes filled with tears, but her grip on the knife tightened. "I'm the only one who cares about you. You'll see that eventually." I managed to slip out the door and called the police. When they arrived, Kara was still standing in the living room, knife in hand, sobbing uncontrollably. She was taken into custody, but the fear of what could have happened still haunts me. It wasn't until after she was gone that I realized how far her obsession had gone. I found hidden cameras in my room, disguised among my belongings. She had been watching me for months, monitoring me, all under the guise of being my friend. Even now, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I can hear her footsteps outside my door. I never thought a simple Craigslist ad could lead to a nightmare. After my long-term boyfriend and I broke up, I was looking for someone to rent out the spare bedroom in my apartment. The rent was steep, and I couldn't afford the place on my own, so I decided to advertise online. That's when I met Emily. Her profile seemed perfect. Young, polite, with a steady job. She was moving to the city for a new position and needed a place quickly. She seemed sweet, respectful, and we had an instant connection. It was hard to say no. She moved in a week later, and at first things were fine. She kept to herself mostly, just coming and going. But after the first few days, I started noticing some weird things. For one, she would always return home at odd hours, sometimes around 2 or 3 a.m. She'd open the door as quietly as possible, but I could never seem to fall back asleep when I heard her. It wasn't just that. She'd often leave her bedroom door slightly ajar, and I would hear her moving around, like pacing. I thought maybe she had trouble sleeping, so I didn't think much of it at first. But then, the noises started getting worse. One night, I was lying in bed when I heard a soft tap on my door. I assumed it was Emily, coming in to talk or maybe borrow something, so I said, "Come in," without thinking. But no one answered. I got up and opened the door, expecting to see her standing there with an innocent excuse. But the hallway was completely empty. I shrugged it off and went back to bed. The next day, I found something odd. My laptop, which I always kept locked in my room, was on my desk. I never left it out. When I checked the history, I found that someone had been searching through my files, specifically documents that I never intended anyone else to see. I asked Emily about it, but she claimed she didn't even know how to use my computer. I didn't believe her, but I didn't press it further. Maybe it was my imagination. Things started getting worse from there. I came home one evening to find Emily standing in the living room, staring out the window. When I asked her what she was doing, she didn't respond for a long time. It was as if she didn't even hear me. Then she blinked, turned, and said, "I just like watching people." I laughed awkwardly, brushing it off as a weird joke. But the feeling of being watched never left me. I kept the curtains closed at all times, but I couldn't shake the thought that Emily was peeking through the cracks in the blinds, always there, but never saying anything. I met Sarah in college. We were both studying to be graphic designers, and she was one of the first people I connected with. We bonded over our love for creative projects and late-night brainstorming sessions. She was fun, outgoing, and always had a new idea or something interesting to talk about. She quickly became my closest friend, and I couldn't imagine my life without her. After graduation, we both decided to stay in the same city, and when my lease was up, I offered to let her move in with me. I had a decent-sized apartment, and it made sense. We would split the rent, save money, and continue living the same kind of carefree lifestyle we had enjoyed in college. She eagerly accepted. At first, everything was normal. Sarah moved in, and we fell into a comfortable routine. We'd work during the day, cook dinner together, and binge-watch shows at night. It felt like nothing had changed. But soon, I started noticing little things that made me feel uneasy. For one, Sarah would leave strange notes around the apartment. At first, I thought they were just her way of being quirky or sentimental. "You're my favorite person," one note said. Another said, "Don't ever leave me." I figured she was just being dramatic, but as time went on, the notes started becoming more personal. One morning, I woke up to find a note on my pillow, written in a scrawl I didn't recognize. "I see you when you're sleeping." I thought maybe it was a joke. Sarah had a twisted sense of humor sometimes. But when I asked her about it, she acted like she didn't know what I was talking about. "I don't even remember writing that," she said with a shrug, brushing it off. "You must have dreamed it." Things escalated. I started seeing signs that Sarah was invading my privacy. My phone would be left out, and I'd notice it was unlocked when I returned to it. My computer, which I always password protected, would be left open, with my personal files randomly accessed. I confronted her several times, but each time she acted surprised, like I was being paranoid. The worst incident happened one night when I came home late after working overtime. I went into my bedroom, and there, in the dim light, I saw Sarah sitting at my desk, staring at my laptop screen. When I asked her what she was doing, she turned around with wide, hollow eyes and simply said, "I was looking at your pictures." I froze. "What pictures?" "Pictures of you," she said matter-of-factly, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "You look so peaceful when you sleep. It makes me feel close to you." My stomach churned and my hands started shaking. "Sarah, what the hell? That's creepy." She just smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I just want to be close to you. You're my best friend. I love you." The words sent chills down my spine. I backed away, my heart racing. "That's not normal, Sarah. You need to stop." But she didn't stop. Over the next few days, Sarah's behavior became more obsessive. She would show up at places I never told her I'd be. My gym, my favorite coffee shop, even my workplace. When I confronted her, she would simply say, "I thought I'd surprise you." But it wasn't a surprise. It was terrifying. One night, I woke up to a strange feeling, like I was being watched. I turned over in bed, and there, in the dim light of the hallway, I saw Sarah's shadow through the crack in my door. She was standing there, staring at me, her face barely visible. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Sarah?" I whispered, but she didn't answer. She just stood there watching me. After what felt like hours, she finally stepped back, her footsteps barely making a sound as she disappeared into the darkness. I knew something had to change. The next morning, I decided to confront her again, but this time, I was done with the excuses. I packed a bag, grabbed my things, and told Sarah I was leaving. I was moving out and finding a new place. She didn't seem surprised. In fact, she looked relieved. "You can't leave," she said, almost in a whisper. "I'll never let you go." Her words made my skin crawl, but I ignored them and walked out. I didn't look back. After I moved out, I thought the worst was over. But then, a few months later, I started getting texts from an unknown number. They were pictures of me walking to work, me eating lunch, me sitting in my car. The last one was the worst. A picture of me asleep in my new apartment, taken through my window. I changed my phone number, moved again, and even told the police about what was happening. But every once in a while, I'll get a message. A picture of me, always from a distance, and I know she's still watching. I've never been one for big gatherings, so when my friend Lucas invited me to a dinner party at his new place, I almost said no. But it had been months since we'd caught up, and I was curious to see his new house. Plus, he assured me it was a small group, just a few friends. After some convincing, I agreed to go. When I arrived at Lucas's house, I immediately felt the oddness of the situation. His place was in a secluded area, far from the city, and there was something unsettling about the quiet. No streetlights, no sound of other cars. Just trees, darkness, and his large old house at the end of a narrow dirt road. The kind of place where the silence presses down on you, and you start questioning your decisions. I rang the doorbell, and Lucas answered with a smile. "Hey, glad you made it." He ushered me in, and I followed him through the front door, past a dark hallway that seemed to stretch on forever. The whole house had this old, almost musty feel to it, but I figured it was just the character of the place. The living room was spacious, but there was no one in it. "Where's everyone?" I asked. Lucas smiled, but it was a little forced. "They're in the kitchen. Come on in." When I stepped into the kitchen, I was met with a strange sight. There were 3 other people there, sitting at the table, already halfway through a meal. The food looked strange, unfamiliar, like something you'd find at a gourmet restaurant, but also unsettling in some way. The plates were garnished beautifully, but the colors of the dishes were too vibrant, almost unnatural. Lucas introduced me to the others. There was Emily, a friend from his old job, and a couple I didn't recognize, Amanda and Jason. Everyone was polite, but there was a strange tension in the air, a heaviness that made it hard to shake off. I noticed how quiet the room was, the conversation stilted, like everyone was forcing a smile. I took a seat at the table, and Lucas brought over a plate for me. "I made sure to cook something you'll like," he said, setting the dish in front of me. I took a cautious look at the plate. It was some sort of dark meat, surrounded by odd vegetables I couldn't quite identify. Everyone else was eating with an almost eager enthusiasm, but I hesitated. The conversation was minimal, each person taking small bites and talking as if they were doing everything they could to avoid saying something. "So, how have you been?" Emily asked me with a strained smile. "It's been forever, huh?" I nodded, trying to break the tension. "Yeah, it's been a while. What have you all been up to?" No one answered immediately. Amanda glanced nervously at the others, then said, "Oh, just enjoying the good company." But it didn't feel like good company. It felt like they were all trapped in a moment they couldn't escape from. Almost like they were all part of something I wasn't supposed to see. Suddenly, Jason laughed awkwardly. "So, Lucas, how did you find this place again? It's pretty remote." Lucas smiled, but his eyes were cold. "Oh, I just came across it, A deal too good to pass up." There was something about his tone, so off, so final, that made me feel a cold knot form in my stomach. I glanced around at the others, and they were all eating silently, almost too quietly. I realized something. None of them had really touched their drinks, only their food. I reached for my water and took a sip, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, like the entire dinner was some kind of performance, with me as the guest of honor in a play I didn't understand. "Hey, Lucas," I said, trying to stay calm. "This meal is interesting, but I have to admit I'm not sure what it is. What exactly did you make?" Lucas's face stiffened, and for a moment, I could have sworn I saw a flicker of something dark in his eyes. He leaned in slightly, his voice a low whisper. "You don't need to worry about what it is. You're here for a reason, aren't you?" I stared at him, the room suddenly feeling smaller, the air thicker. My heart pounded. What the hell did that mean? I looked at the others, who were now watching me with strange expressions, their mouths covered with half-eaten food. Then, something clicked in my head. The way they weren't drinking anything, the way the conversation had died, the way Lucas had been so insistent on cooking something I would like. It wasn't just the food, it was the way they were acting. I stood up abruptly. "I'm sorry, I don't feel too well. I think I should go." Everyone at the table remained silent, their eyes fixed on me. The air felt suffocating now, and as I backed away from the table, I realized Lucas wasn't smiling anymore. The others were frozen, waiting. "Don't you want to stay?" Lucas asked softly, his voice like ice. I didn't say a word. I turned and bolted for the door, barely making it outside. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, slamming the door shut and speeding away. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see one of them watching me from the windows. But there was nothing, just darkness and the sound of my own rapid breathing. I haven't heard from Lucas since. No calls, no texts, no social media posts, nothing. I don't know what happened that night, but I'm pretty sure I wasn't supposed to be there. It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway, a road trip with my friend Kyle, who I'd known since high school. We hadn't seen each other much in the last few years, both of us busy with work and life. So when he suggested we take a drive out to this cabin he rented in the mountains, I agreed. A few days away from the city sounded like exactly what I needed. The drive started off fine. We talked, laughed, and reminisced about old times. Kyle had always been the adventurous one, so it didn't surprise me when he suggested taking a detour through some back roads he had heard about. He said it was a shortcut, a more scenic route, and promised it would save us time. But the further we drove, the less comfortable I felt. The paved road turned into gravel, then into a dirt trail. The trees were dense, and the farther we went, the more isolated it felt. No cars, no signs, not even power lines. Just trees, stretching out for miles. "Kyle, are you sure we're going the right way?" I asked, glancing nervously out the window. "Relax," he said with a smile. "This is part of the adventure. Trust me, the cabin is up ahead." But the thing was, I did trust him. Kyle had never steered me wrong before. I tried to calm down, but the road kept getting narrower, and after what felt like hours of driving, we still hadn't seen a single cabin. Just endless forest. It wasn't until we reached a dead end that I realized something was seriously wrong. There was no cabin, no houses, just a clearing surrounded by trees. Kyle stopped the car and got out, grabbing his backpack from the back seat. "We'll have to walk the rest of the way," he said, as if this was perfectly normal. "Walk? Where?" I asked, stepping out and looking around. "There's nothing here." He just smiled, that same carefree smile he always had when he was about to do something reckless. "It's not far. Come on." Something in his tone unsettled me. The way he said it, like he knew exactly where we were going. But that made no sense. He hadn't been here before. He said he'd found the cabin online, but now it seemed like he was leading me somewhere very specific, somewhere he'd been planning for a while. "Kyle, this doesn't feel right," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maybe we should turn back." "We can't turn back now," he said, not even looking at me. He was already walking toward the tree line, the dense woods swallowing him up. "It's just a little farther." I hesitated. My phone had no signal out here, and it was getting late. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the clearing, and the thought of being stuck out here overnight sent a chill down my spine. But Kyle was my friend. We'd been through so much together, and I didn't want to seem paranoid. So, against my better judgment, I followed him. We walked for what felt like an eternity, through dense brush and undergrowth, with no clear path in sight. I kept asking him where we were going, but his answers became more vague, more cryptic. "It's just ahead, or you'll see soon." Finally, We reached another clearing, but this one was different. In the middle of it was an old, dilapidated building. It wasn't a cabin. It was more like an abandoned shack, rotting wood and broken windows, half collapsed on one side. I stopped dead in my tracks. "Kyle, what is this? This isn't a cabin." He turned to me, his face expressionless now. "We're here." "What do you mean, we're here? This place looks like it's been abandoned for years." Kyle didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at me with a look I'd never seen before. Cold, detached, almost predatory. My heart started racing. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, the kind where everything feels wrong but you can't wake up. "Kyle, I'm serious. We need to leave. Now." He took a step toward me, his expression darkening. "Why would you want to leave? I brought you all this way." I backed up, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. Something had changed in him, something I couldn't explain. This wasn't the Kyle I knew. "What's going on? Why are we here?" "You're always so cautious," he said, his voice low. "Always afraid of everything. I thought this trip would help you get over that." I kept backing away, but he followed me, step for step. "What are you talking about? Kyle, this isn't funny." His eyes were locked on mine, and there was no warmth in them anymore. "You'll understand soon." I turned and ran. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get away from him, away from whatever this was. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps getting faster, closer. "Don't run," he yelled after me, his voice echoing through the trees. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I didn't stop. I couldn't. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my legs were burning as I sprinted through the woods, branches scratching at my arms and face. I had no idea where I was, no sense of direction. But I kept running, fueled by pure adrenaline and fear. Finally, after what felt like hours, I burst out of the trees and onto a road. It was empty, but it was a road, a sign that I wasn't completely lost. I looked back, expecting to see Kyle right behind me, but he wasn't there. The woods were still and silent, like he had vanished. I didn't wait. I flagged down the first car I saw and begged the driver to take me to the nearest town. I never heard from Kyle again after that day. His phone was disconnected, and when I tried to report him missing, they told me no one by that name had rented a cabin in the area. I don't know what his plan was, or why he brought me out there. But I'm sure of one thing: if I hadn't run, I don't think I would have made it out. It all started when my friend Eric asked for a favor. We'd known each other for years, though we'd grown distant after high school. Still, when he called out of the blue and said he needed help moving some stuff from his family's old cabin, I agreed. We'd always been close, and I figured this would be a chance to catch up. The cabin was in a remote part of the woods, far from town. Eric's family used to vacation there when we were younger, but he told me it had been abandoned for years. His parents had passed away, and now it was up to him to clean the place out. It sounded simple enough, just a day trip to help an old friend move some boxes. I didn't think much of it at the time. The drive was long and lonely, the kind of back roads where the trees close in around you, and you start to feel like you're the only person left in the world. By the time I pulled up to the cabin, it was late afternoon, and the sun was already sinking behind the trees, casting long shadows over the property. Eric was standing outside, leaning against his truck. He gave me a grin when he saw me. "Hey man, glad you made it." The cabin looked worse than I expected. Run down, with broken windows and the roof half caving in. We walked inside, and the air smelled musty, like it hadn't been touched in years. The place was a mess, with furniture overturned and dust covering everything. We got to work quickly, loading up boxes of old junk and clearing out the rooms. It was tiring, but nothing out of the ordinary. The weird part came when we found the cellar. I didn't even know the cabin had a cellar until Eric pulled back a rug in the living room, revealing a trap door. "What's down there?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but the sight of that door gave me a bad feeling. It was the kind of feeling you get when something just feels wrong, but you can't explain why. "Old family stuff," Eric said, his tone a little too dismissive. "Just some things I need to get rid of. Come on, it won't take long." The stairs creaked as we descended into the cellar. It was dark, damp, and the air was heavy with the smell of mildew. Eric switched on a dim light bulb that flickered weakly overhead, casting strange shadows on the walls. The cellar was filled with boxes, old furniture, and tools that looked like they hadn't been used in decades. But what really caught my attention was the far corner of the room, where something large was covered with a dirty sheet. I stared at it, my gut twisting with unease. "What's under there?" I asked, nodding toward the sheet. Eric hesitated for a second, just a second, but it was enough for me to catch the shift in his demeanor. His easygoing grin faded, replaced by a strange seriousness. "Just some junk. Don't worry about it." He moved quickly, almost too quickly, toward the sheet and yanked it off, revealing an old wooden chest. It was huge, almost as tall as my waist, with heavy iron latches that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. "What's in there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just family stuff, like I said." Eric's tone was sharper now, and for the first time all day, I felt genuinely uncomfortable. There was something off about the whole situation, something he wasn't telling me. Eric knelt down and started fiddling with the latches. "Help me lift this," he said without looking up. I didn't move. "Eric, what's going on? You've been weird ever since we got down here." He stopped messing with the chest and looked up at me, his eyes dark. "Look, it's nothing. I just need to get rid of this stuff, okay? Don't make it a big deal." But it was a big deal. I could feel it. My instincts were screaming at me to leave, to get out of that cellar and not look back. But I didn't want to seem like a coward, so I reluctantly walked over to help him. Together, we lifted the heavy lid. The smell hit me first. It was sharp, foul, like something had been rotting inside for years. I gagged and stepped back as Eric pulled out a tarp-covered object. "Jesus, Eric, what the hell is that?" I asked, backing up as he unwrapped the tarp. He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled back the last corner of the tarp, revealing what looked like old tools, rusted knives, saws, and other things I couldn't immediately identify. But what really made my stomach drop was the pile of stained clothes at the bottom of the chest. "What is this?" I demanded, my heart racing. "What the hell is all of this?" Eric stood up slowly, his face calm, but his eyes dark with something I hadn't seen before. "It's just stuff I need to get rid of," he said, as if that explained anything. I backed away toward the stairs. "I'm not helping you with this. I don't know what you're into, but I'm done." Eric stepped toward me, his expression hardening. "You're already involved. You think I invited you out here just to move boxes?" Panic set in. "Eric, I'm leaving." He didn't try to stop me. He just stood there, staring, as I rushed up the stairs and out of the cabin. I ran to my car and sped off without looking back, my mind racing with confusion and fear. I don't know what Eric was planning, or why he brought me there, but something tells me that Chest held more secrets than I'll ever want to know. He hasn't called since, and I've blocked his number. I haven't reported anything, partly because I don't know what I'd even say, and partly because I'm afraid of what might happen if I do. But I can't stop thinking about what was in that cellar, and I keep wondering, what if I hadn't left in time? When my friend Leah offered me a job, I couldn't turn it down. She had been working for this private contractor, as she called it, handling odd jobs in remote locations. She said the pay was incredible, and the work was easy. We hadn't talked in years, but when she called me out of the blue and said her boss was looking for someone to help out for a weekend, I agreed. The job was simple. Drive out to a property in the middle of nowhere, meet Leah there, and help her organize some files for this mysterious contractor. The details were vague, but I figured it was just some rich guy's second home, probably an eccentric collector or something. Leah was a smart girl. I trusted her judgment. The drive out there was long and lonely. My GPS signal cut out an hour before I reached the house, which sat at the end of a narrow, winding road, hidden deep within the woods. By the time I arrived, the sun was starting to set, casting a dull orange glow over the dense trees. The house itself was huge and eerily quiet, the kind of place that looked like it should have been abandoned. I parked and stepped out, the sound of gravel crunching under my feet, the only noise. Leah's car was already there, but I didn't see her outside. I knocked on the door, and after a moment she opened it. "Hey, you made it," she said, her smile wide but her eyes off. It was hard to explain, but something about her seemed different from the Leah I used to know. Inside, the house was sparsely furnished, like it had been bought and forgotten about. Dust covered most surfaces, and the air was heavy, stale. Leah led me into a back room filled with boxes. "These are the files we need to organize," she said, gesturing to the mess. "Shouldn't take more than a few hours." We got to work, sorting through old paperwork, business receipts, things that didn't make much sense to me. Every now and then, I'd ask Leah who exactly this contractor was, but she dodged the question. "You'll meet him later," was all she'd say. The more we worked, the more uneasy I felt. Something wasn't adding up. Leah was acting strange, distant, and when I asked why she didn't just call in a moving company to handle all this, she laughed it off in a way that made my skin crawl. It was getting dark outside when I finally said, "I think we should call it a day. We can finish up tomorrow." Leah didn't answer. She just kept sorting through papers like she hadn't heard me. "Leah?" I said, louder this time. Finally, she looked up, her face serious. "We can't leave yet." "What do you mean?" "We've been at this for hours. We'll come back in the morning." She stood up, blocking my path to the door. "No, we can't leave, not until the job is done." I laughed nervously, thinking she was joking, but the look in her eyes said otherwise. "Leah, this isn't funny. I'm leaving." I tried to push past her, but she grabbed my arm harder than I expected. "You don't understand. We're not allowed to leave until he gets here." I froze. "Who's he?" She didn't answer, just stared at me with this blank, almost robotic expression. Panic set in. I yanked my arm free and headed for the front door, but it wouldn't budge. The deadbolt was locked, and when I turned around, Leah was holding the key. "You're not going anywhere," she said calmly. "What the hell, Leah? Give me the key." "I told you," she said, her voice disturbingly calm. "We have to wait for him." "Who is this guy? What is going on?" She didn't answer, just stood there with the key in her hand, her eyes glassy, distant. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no way out. Every window had been boarded up, and the only exit was the front door, which Leah was blocking. Then, the headlights of a car cut through the darkness outside. I heard gravel crunching under tires as someone pulled up to the house. Leah's expression didn't change, but I could see her shoulders relax, like she had been waiting for this moment all along. The door swung open, and a tall man in a suit stepped inside, his face obscured by the shadows. He didn't say anything, just stood there, staring at me. Leah stepped forward, handing him the key. "Everything's ready," she said softly. I bolted. I didn't know where I was going, but I wasn't sticking around to find out who this guy was or what he wanted. I sprinted down the hallway toward the back of the house and found a door leading to the basement. It was the only place I could hide. I stumbled down the stairs, my hands shaking as I pulled out my phone. No signal. Of course. I heard footsteps upstairs, slow and deliberate. They were looking for me. I squeezed myself into a corner, trying to stay quiet, my breath shallow and ragged. I could hear Leah's voice, calm and cold, as she spoke to the man. "She won't get far." The footsteps stopped at the top of the basement stairs. I held my breath as the door creaked open. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend away. My friend Nick had inherited an old lake house from his uncle, and he invited a small group of us to spend a few days there, unwinding and disconnecting from the world. We hadn't seen much of Nick recently. He'd been off the grid, dealing with the inheritance and some family issues. But when he reached out, it felt like a great opportunity to catch up. The drive to the lake house was beautiful at first, tree-lined roads and shimmering water on either side. But as we got deeper into the woods, the landscape became less inviting. The trees thickened, the roads narrowed, and the GPS signal disappeared. I had to rely on Nick's vague directions to find the place, which felt like it was miles away from anything. When I finally arrived, the house sat on a hill overlooking the lake, surrounded by dense woods. It was old, the kind of house that had clearly seen better days, with peeling paint and creaky-looking windows. Nick greeted me at the door with his usual grin, but something about him seemed off. His once carefree demeanor now had an edge of nervousness, like he was on high alert. The rest of the group, Sarah, Mike, and Tom, showed up shortly after, and we all settled in. Nick led us around the house, pointing out the basics: kitchen, living room, the old dock down by the lake. The place had a strange vibe, like it had been left to decay for decades, and Nick's attempts to clean it up barely scratched the surface. That night, after a few drinks, the unease I'd felt earlier started to fade. We sat by the fire, laughing and reminiscing about old times, Nick included. He seemed to relax, even opening up a bit about his uncle and the strained relationship they'd had. He mentioned how the lake house had been in the family for generations, but had been neglected for years. It wasn't until later that the mood started to shift. Nick began acting strange, quiet, distant. At first, I thought he'd had too much to drink. But then he stood up abruptly and said, "I need to show you all something." We followed him outside, down a narrow path that led to the lake. The air was cold, and the trees cast long shadows across the ground. We reached an old shed near the dock, its roof half collapsed, and the door hanging on by a single hinge. "What are we doing here?" Sarah asked, her voice nervous. Nick didn't answer. He pushed open the door, revealing a large wooden box in the center of the shed. It was covered in dirt and grime, clearly having been there for a long time. "I found this when I first got here," Nick said, his voice low. "It belonged to my uncle." Mike laughed, trying to break the tension. "Dude, it's just a box. What's the big deal?" Nick turned to face us, and in the dim light, I could see something dark in his eyes. "It's not just a box," he said. "It's what's inside." We stood there, frozen, as Nick knelt down and opened the lid. Inside were rows of old notebooks, yellowed with age. He picked one up and flipped through it, his hands shaking slightly. "My uncle kept records," Nick said quietly. "Detailed notes about everyone who stayed here, about what he did to them." Sarah gasped, taking a step back. "What are you talking about, Nick?" He didn't look up, just kept flipping through the pages. He killed people, over the years. Everyone who came to visit. He'd invite them up here, just like I did with you, and then he'd get rid of them. He buried them around the property. The air seemed to freeze. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was saying. "Nick, are you messing with us?" I asked, my voice shaking. But the look on his face told me he wasn't. There was something broken in his eyes, something desperate. He stood up and tossed the notebook aside. I didn't want to believe it, but it's all here. Every detail. The things he did. I couldn't just ignore it. Tom was the first to speak. "Okay, man, we need to go. We can figure this out later, but we're leaving now." Nick shook his head, his voice growing frantic. "You don't understand. I tried to stop it. I thought I could break the cycle, but it's too late. He told me I had to do it. I'm sorry." Suddenly, Nick pulled a hunting knife from his jacket, the blade catching the light from the moon. Panic surged through me. "Nick, put the knife down," but he wasn't listening. His breathing grew ragged, his eyes wide with fear, or maybe something worse. "I didn't want this," he whispered. "I really didn't." Everything happened so fast after that. Tom lunged at Nick, trying to wrestle the knife from him, but Nick was quicker. Sarah screamed, and I felt my feet moving, trying to run, but there was nowhere to go. The woods closed in around us, the lake looming dark and endless behind. Somehow in the chaos, I managed to break free and sprint toward the house. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath coming in gasps. I didn't look back. I made it to the car, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the door open. I jumped inside and sped down the narrow road, not caring about the twists and turns, not caring about anything except getting away from that place. I haven't heard from anyone since. I don't know what happened to the others, if they got away, if Nick did what his uncle had done before him. I don't think I'll ever know. But I can still hear Sarah's scream echoing in my ears, and I can't shake the feeling that someday I'll be next.